welcome to Red River. This is BentlBuilds, and we're going to jump right in. I want you to notice here that this highway runs directly in between the river and the national park. You might remember in the last video I put a fence all the way along the side of that road because I didn't want people to be getting into the national park anywhere other than the designated entry points. However, in doing that, I inadvertently also trapped in wildlife and basically removed their access to the river, like a big dumb idiot. So someone made the suggestion that I do those cool wildlife overpasses. I don't know if you've seen those. They built one just outside of Salt Lake a couple years ago. There's a bunch in Nevada that I've seen along I-80. They're really a pretty awesome idea, and they make a lot of sense. So that's what my original plan was. You can see here, I'm doing an underpass style. There is not a reason for this. I just started to do an underpass, and then I realized that that's not what I wanted to do, but I was in too deep, so I was like, hey, it's gonna be an underpass, not an overpass. It's gonna be fine. So that's what we've got, but it definitely will provide access for the animals to get down to the river without having to cross the road and get maimed by cars, which I would assume the animals are not particularly fond of doing. I can't say for sure. I haven't ever talked to an animal who has been hit by a car, although I did hit a deer with my car in the spring of this year, and it didn't really seem like the deer liked it, so my car definitely didn't. And I didn't either. So at the very least, we're protecting society from that. At this point, you can see I'm playing around with the fencing. I was trying to figure out a way to, that would funnel the wildlife in, and then I kind of realized I was overthinking it. They just need a pretty simple way to get through. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I was gonna put in fencing on the other side, but then I realized I wanted to do some bike lanes. Originally, I did not plan on putting bike lanes in this early, but people were a bunch of whiners and were complaining that my collection of small towns were way too car-oriented, which, here's the thing. I am a big fan of bike infrastructure and mass transit. Love them so much. The problem is that sometimes people get so hyper-focused on loving those things that they don't think critically about, the functionality of them. In a rural environment, mass transit just is not as effective as it would be in an urban one. That you would think is pretty logical, but no, it's still a total crime to own cars in a rural area. These people totally ignored that I already have a small bus network between the towns. That doesn't matter. Just the simple act of building roads is enough to set some of these people off. Again, not to say that I don't like mass transit and bike infrastructure and stuff like that. I love it. I love walkable cities and all that. It's just time and place. Those things generally don't make sense in small towns. But that being said, there are a couple exceptions to this. One of them being that there is a national park set between these two towns, and people who visit national parks tend to be a little more on the active side, and they might want to do some biking. So it does make sense, now that the national park is there, to put in some bike infrastructure between Small Rock and Red Bend. so that there's really easy access to the national park by bike. You can see that for sections of it, I have bike lanes, and other sections, it's a dedicated trail. Basically, that just depended on what made the most sense for that spot. And at this point, I just couldn't let go that I built that wildlife crossing like opposite of the way I wanted to. So I figured we're just gonna do a second wildlife crossing that is actually what I wanted in the first place, with, you know, the wildlife crossing over instead of under. This ended up being a lot more tricky than I had anticipated, but I wanted to make it work really bad, so I tried my best. You'll notice I'm putting bike lanes through the tunnel too. This is the same thing. It just seemed like it made more sense to do it that way than to like build a separate bike tunnel for that trail, or, you know, that kind of thing. I just felt like it would be the more logical decision to just have the bike lanes have the trail converge into the lanes through the tunnel. And you can see it meets up with the crosswalks. You know, there's going to be traffic control devices there to make sure that cyclists are able to easily cross into the bike lanes when necessary. All that good stuff. So now I'm just smoothing things out. It is a little steeper than I had pictured, but, you know, all of these animals are living up in the mountains, you know. Some steepness to get down to the river is not going to be a deal breaker for these animals, I would say. So now I am just putting in the fences to funnel the animals over the crossing and away from the road. And now that I've done all of that, I can finish fencing in the highway to completely, you know, close it off, make it a lot harder for animals to get to it. And by doing this, it means that the bank of the river can be more directly a part of the national park, and the highway that goes through is just kind of a little public space through it that, you know, you don't have to pay for access for, but on both sides is the national park. Since it's a main thoroughfare, it seemed like it would be a little weird to be like, actually you have to pay to drive on this road, period. So it's like a free little scenic drive, kind of. I do really like how this turned out. I said last time that I wanted to fill it in with a little more trees, stuff like that. So that's what I'm going to do. I also want to note, because I'm feeling a little spicy about this. Someone in the comments got all snippy with me about how I built a berm around most of the shoreline of Small Rock for flood prevention, and they were like, I can't believe you left no opportunities for recreation, even though I spent like a full minute talking about how I pictured the recreation working with that space that I left open. And I basically said, well, there's a lot more river, so don't you worry. And look at all of this open riverbank that people can have access to, and animals. All of this to say, if you're gonna criticize me, by all means criticize me, but don't think for even a second that if your criticism is stupid, that I won't like fully roast you in a video. I'm not a good enough person to not do that. Unfortunately, I do not restrict my level of pettiness. I let the petty do what the petty does, you know? So just wanted to toss that in there. If you do have like actual like constructive thoughts and stuff like that, I would love to hear them. Like I said, these crossings were someone's idea. Like, they commented and I thought that was an awesome idea, so I figured I'd put them in. But yeah, complaining about dumb things is not gonna get you anywhere, just saying. Anyway, so the trees are in. I think it's looking really good. I'm very proud of it. The next thing that I'm going to work on, instead of putting more amenities in the national park, like I kind of said I would, I want to work on the rail network before I get too far into this build, because I've been playing this game for a little bit, and without fail, every time my rail network is trash. Not because it's not working, but because it just gets so congested. So people are using it. It's just they're using it a lot, and it becomes dysfunctional because, you know, cargo and passenger rail are sharing lines and all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't work. So I thought that if I get ahead of it on this and I actually make an effort to plan it out beforehand, it might work to my benefit. So this is going to be the first passenger rail station for the area. Naturally, it would be in Small Rock. It's the largest city and the most accessible. Trying to put rail up the canyon along with the highway, along with the national park, would just be way too much. So Small Rock is going to be the end of the line in this direction. It's going to, you know, spread out in all of the other directions, but in this direction, it ends at the mouth of the canyon. I did have to knock down a few blocks worth of houses. You know, some sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. But this worked out because the station is on a more major road. So it's easily accessible. It opens up good opportunity for more commercial development. Not to mention that, like, if you put residential around the train stations, they like get all annoyed about the noise pollution, which I have never understood. I kind of enjoy like living close to a big road and stuff like that, because I think it's kind of fun just to hear stuff. I might be in the minority on that, but I do really like it for some reason. This bend right here was giving me a lot of trouble. I wanted it to be, you know, a smooth transition, and it kept not being that, but I finally made it. And then this line is basically just going to extend straight out until it meets up with the main line, like way out at the far end of the valley, like where the map ends. The idea is that this whole line that I'm building right now will be a passenger rail line, and so a lot of the development of the city and of the suburbs are gonna kind of follow along that rail line, to really make mass transit easy to use. But that being said, there will be more passenger rail lines that will extend out in other directions. But that will be one of the major lines. And I will have other mass transit options too. My next project here is I'm checking to make sure all of the bus lines that I already put in between the towns are good. And I'm gonna be putting in 2 circular routes within Small Rock, and then another route between Small Rock and Red Bend. The circular routes They basically mirror each other. Just, other sides, one goes clockwise, one goes counterclockwise. They will both have stops in front of Town Hall. That's going to be kind of the main thing. Like in both directions, there will be 4 total stops in front of City Hall rather than there being just the 2 that most of these other stops are getting. So 2 in each direction instead of 1 in each direction. That would have been a way easier way to say it in the first place, but it's fine. Anyway, so this next route, you can see it's also starting off at the train station. It's gonna go up the highway. It'll have a stop at the City Hall because there's not stops there, That would be a place for a lot of transfers. There will be a stop right outside the National Park so that there's easy access for that. And then it goes into Red Bend to the gondola stop. So there's really easy mass transit access to Rivertop State Park. There's easy access for bus transfers to their bus networks and the ones between these smaller towns. And that is where we're gonna leave it today. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want. Let me know if you have ideas. If you have dumb criticisms, maybe keep them to yourself. And yeah, have a really good night or day or whatever.